Watercolor leaves aren't green. Nope. You heard me right, in case you were wondering if I'd fallen down or something. Watercolor leaves are all the colors, friends, and here's what I mean. Our trusty companion, the color wheel, she has so much to offer us, and every time you dab a bit of red, blue, yellow, or whatever isn't black or brown into your wet green on the page, you give your leaves a fighting chance to really sing. Recently, I did a yellow mixing experiment where I added black or brown or purple to the same yellow on the page. I'll let you decide, but I was feeling all the feels for how the purple addition made that yellow so curiously rich and exciting. Now check the link below to watch that full lesson because it's one you don't want to miss. Now before we get into it, because of course we're going to paint leaves today, one of my favorite things to paint, I want to show you how I get inspired. And I've got my trusty iPad, and I just like to search leaf silhouettes or leaves in general in Google, and it brings up a whole bunch of fun leaf shapes, leaf species, silhouettes, whatever you want to call them, that you can kind of have off to the side, be thinking about as you're creating a cluster of leaves or some filler for a painting. It's a great way not to get bored or fall into the trap of creating the same leaf shape over and over again. We're gonna mess around a little bit today before we get into the painting. I know I already said before we get into the painting, so I guess I'm really just trying to keep you in suspense, but I'm going to take some green and start to mix in some unexpected colors, and let's see what happens. Start with some green and then add some pink and blend them together. Really cool. It's like a peachy yellow. I love that. Some wine, burgundy, alizarin crimson, add in some aqua or a turquoise. Gorgeous, moody, dusty, greenish blue color. Love it. I think you see where I'm going here. I just really want you to get adventurous with your greens. Look at that, stunning. So get some scrap paper out and see how many greens you can paint and mix and build on the page. Let's start with the yellow and add some green to it and a little bit of red, and see how I'm mixing right on the page to see what happens. And no, I didn't just rinse my brush there before I went back into that green. Look at that, it's a little bit of a muddy olive color. And starting with a green again, and I'm just grabbing whatever comes to mind in my palette. Don't be too precious about it. Adding some blue, adding some red, bringing in some pink and peach. I'm not rinsing my brush in between because I purposely want to see what happens with that dirty color. If you want to see an entire lesson where I don't rinse my brush, not once the entire time, check the link below. Oh my gosh, I made a lot of people nervous with that one. All right, friends, moving on to a little exercise from my book, The Art for Joy's Sake Journal. There's a section in this book where I ask you to go outside or snip a leaf from your garden or from the woods. It can literally be any leaf you find anywhere. It can be from a houseplant, but get yourself a leaf. You're going to get to this page where it says document the colors of a leaf. So we're not actually going to paint the leaf here. We're literally just going to lay down some color, mix the color on the page. I've literally got a dying succulent leaf here, but there's some beautiful pinks and different shades of green, and you're just gonna start slapping some color down on the page from your palette. Be instinctual, be in the moment, work quickly. Don't rinse your brush as much as you think you might need to, and see what happens. And you can do this exercise even if you don't have my book. If you're curious about my book, you can find more info below, check it out, but just grab a scrap piece of paper and get going. I adore this experiment because you're not tied to the stress of creating the perfect leaf shape. It's just about color. And so by the end of this, you can see my page is a hot mess, but I've really played around with some interesting colors and I feel good about it. I feel loosened up and I feel ready to dive in to something a little bit more specific. Today, friends, we're going to be painting one of my favorites, silver dollar eucalyptus. I just love the shape, and the name implies the shape. They're round little leaves and they're just so sweet and cute, and depending on which angle you're viewing them from will change their shape. So they might be more ovals, they might be more squat, just something to keep in mind as you dream up and develop your own little bunch of silver dollar eucalyptus with me today. Friends, I'd love for you to connect with me on Instagram. Tag me with this information below, friends, because I want to see what you're working on. All right, let's get into it. I'm not going to be mixing on the palette today, and I am using my 1/2-inch dagger, friends. You can use a number 6 round or something very similar if you don't have a dagger. And I'm just starting to make some very simple, casual ovals on the page. I've got 3 going right now, and I'm starting to bump them together. And the point here is to experiment with your greens. Grab stuff that you have on the mixing trays from previous paintings. Re-wet it, lift it, use it on the page. See what happens. Grab greens, grab pinks, grab oranges. Right now I've got some muddy green, gray colors that just were existing on my palette, and I'm dropping in some soft blues to see what happens. The other thing that I want you to experiment with is pushing the color around on the page once you've gotten it down on the page. So rinse your brush, bring in just some clean water to really force those colors to mingle. You know what I'm talking about. Have fun with this. If you want a more realistic impression of the silver dollar eucalyptus, just keep in mind to vary the size and the shapes of your ovals. Some are going to be more round, some are going to be more oval, some are going to be more fat, more thin. You get me. All right, friends, I'm just continuing on here. I've got some purplish tones on my brush. And remember, I'm also not rinsing. So maybe this is a good time to kind of give you the rules of play. And you know how I feel about rules. So take that word with a grain of salt. So number 1, try to avoid the desire to rinse your brush all the time. Part of the fun of this exercise, this experiment, is discovery. And I want you to discover what happens when you've got more colors on your brush. Number 2, don't overthink as you go to your palette to choose a color to start with. Just literally dip your brush into the first color your eye goes to. Number 3, force yourself to choose additives for your green, colors that you would normally never put into green. And also experiment with how much of that color. So for example, lay down a green oval, whatever green you've got, on the page. While it's wet, dab in some red. Dab a little bit in it first, then dab more, then dab even more, and start to blendy blend all those colors on the page and see what happens. Number 4, and maybe this one should have been number 1, but I want you to work on the good paper. I know I said this was an exercise experiment, but I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised, and I think the likelihood that you're going to love this painting is very high. So I want you to take that leap and choose to work on the good paper for this one, okay? Now, I know I've given black and brown kind of a bad rap already in this video, but friends, feel free. Get your lamp black out, get your burnt sienna, your burnt umber, all the things out, and play with those too. There's nothing wrong with those. And in fact, it might be helpful for you to see the difference and notice how black and brown in a green is going to play differently than colors. Now, my page stays nice and wet for a long time. I'm using Academy watercolor paper. I live in the northeast part of the United States where it's not very, very dry right now. So friends, my page is staying wet. If your page isn't staying wet for as long, you might want to re-wet some areas so you can continue to layer and keep that wet on wet thing going. And if you're wondering right now what I mean by wet on wet, if you're really new here, first of all, welcome, hello, welcome to the crazy house. No, we love it here. Trust me. But I want you to head down below. There is a video perfect for beginners where I teach you all of the beginner techniques, Kristy style. You're going to want to check that one out. Okay, it's time. Friends, are you having a good time? Then give this video a boop. That's a like. It really helps out my channel, and it makes sure that more folks like us get to get in on all this fun, right? Also, friends, I want you to head into comments. Let me know what you're most excited about with greens. What moment did you have where you were like, I never thought of that before? let's get the conversation going. Just a little reminder that has really nothing to do with color, but when your shapes on the page are wet, you still have the perfect opportunity to refine the edge of those shapes, to change the silhouette. So always remember, the wet page is an opportunity, not just to add color, but to also edit your shapes. Now, a note about composition, because you know I love composition and it means a lot to me to really pay attention to it. I'm thinking of this eucalyptus cluster as kind of a very simple cascade. I don't have anything that's branching out too widely, and it almost looks like a bunch of grapes. So if you think about how a bunch of grapes has more volume at the top and starts to kind of get skinnier and smaller as you go towards the bottom, and that is kind of the approach I'm taking here. And also, things are a little curved. Everything that I'm doing, the overall impression when you step back and look at this cluster of eucalyptus, is that the whole bunch is slightly curved, and that is just because a curve is softer on the eyes, more attractive, and looks more interesting than a more rigid, straight line overall impression of your eucalyptus branch. Now, remember how I invited you to use the good paper? Here's why, because at this point, our experiment is pretty much complete, but we're gonna wrap things up and really turn this into a gorgeous finished piece. I've got my liner brush out. Things are still kind of damp on the page, but I'm starting to use just a slightly darker contrasting color. Just pick up whatever's on your palette that's in the mixing tray, or mix a little bit of something dark with a green and add a little red, and you're gonna have a nice muted contrasted color. And I'm starting to add these little veins down the middle of the silver dollar eucalyptus, and that's probably not the name for it, but you know what I mean. There's just kind of that indentation in the middle of each one. I'd invite you to mix up your color a little bit. Don't make all those indentations the same color, and start to think about adding a little suggestion of a branch right at the top, just to give things a little bit more structure. Now, because things are still damp on the page, you're going to notice me adding in a little bit of that dark contrasting color that I'm using for those indentations. I'm dabbing them in repeatedly to like the bottom or the top of the leaf, and that just adds a lovely little accent and some really simple definition and depth. And because everything is damp on the page, that dark color is going to very quickly and easily diffuse into the other colors on that leaf already. Now I'm back to my 1/2-inch dagger, and I'm adding in some different shape and definitely smaller scale leaves, just to suggest a little bit of movement. So these are smaller and definitely more oval and kind of more irregularly shaped on one or more sides of the leaf. And that just adds a nice sense of whimsy to the bunch. Things were starting to look a little too repetitive for me. And then also I'm adding in a little bit of a suggestion of like a seeded eucalyptus. So a few dots and then a few simple thin lines connecting the dots with my liner brush, and before you know it, we have a gorgeous spray of eucalyptus. We've explored our greens, and I really hope you're having fun with this and feeling good about it. Friends, give this video a boop, a like, if you're having a great time. And yes, again, it's time to head into the comments. I have a question for you. Have you ever used a liner brush before? And if you have, how do you feel about it? If you haven't used a liner brush, let me know if you're curious about trying one and why. Wrapping up the details here with my 1/2-inch dagger, again, going in with that contrasting dark color that you have and just dabbing in some areas. Remember, friends, at this point, I tricked you a little, didn't I? You thought this was ending, but it's really not. I want to talk a little bit about glazing. This is a fantastic technique. It's a classic technique where you apply your first layer of color, you let that completely dry, and then you go over top with a glaze on another layer of color. And I did just that with that middle, that kind of top middle leaf there of the eucalyptus bunch. So you can glaze with clean water and then dab in more color. You can actually glaze on top with another color. And so think about that. Think about building up the intensity and the drama and the intrigue of your greens by glazing on more layers of color. Let me show you what I mean. All right, let me show you how this works. So everything here is dry basically now. So I'm going on with just some clean water, following the shape of the original leaf. And once that's all evenly damp, I'm gonna go ahead with some color, some peachy pink, and dab it in. And look at that. Look at the incredible effect. You're still seeing the original green shine through, but now you've got this gorgeous, sunny, golden, kind of ambery haze. And oh, it's so good. So there are 2 layers of wonder to this exercise. Get your original layer down, and then I want you to go over top on some of these leaves and play around with glazing because it's incredible. It opens up a whole new world in your watercolor journey for sure. Back to our eucalyptus, friends, to add a last few details. And you know what? I'm thinking you might want a little bit more. So down below, there is a link for you with yet another little exercise to keep your creative juices flowing long after you finish watching this video. And friends, you know what? When it comes to painting leaves, this is something that no one else is teaching, and there's a whole video about it, and you really need to check it out. So go get more leaves and happy painting.